The night Whitney Houston discovered Bobby Brown's ultimate betrayal, she finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. And it wasn't this. But before you hear about that devastating moment, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more untold stories about music's greatest legends. It was March 1989 at the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles. Whitney Houston, 26 and at the absolute peak of her career, sat in the audience wearing a stunning white gown. She had just released her second album, Whitney, which had produced 4 consecutive #1 hits. She was America's sweetheart, the gospel girl from Newark, who had conquered the world with her voice. Across the room, a young man in a cream-colored jersey knit suit was preparing to take the stage. Bobby Brown, just 20 years old, was the former lead singer of New Edition, who had recently gone solo with his breakthrough album, Don't Be Cruel. He was everything Whitney wasn't supposed to want, a self-proclaimed bad boy from the Boston projects with a reputation for trouble and controversy. But when Bobby stepped onto that stage and began performing My Prerogative, Whitney felt something she'd never experienced before. Years later, she would describe that moment to friends. He comes on stage with this all-cream, jersey-knit suit on, and I said, he is fly. For a woman who had spent her entire life being the perfect daughter, the perfect Christian, the perfect pop star, Bobby Brown represented something dangerous and intoxicating: freedom. What Whitney didn't know that night was that Bobby had been watching her too. Despite being 5 years younger, he was mesmerized by her elegance, her talent, and her seemingly untouchable perfection. But what Bobby felt wasn't just attraction, it was a challenge. Here was America's princess, and he was determined to make her his. But what Bobby did at their first private meeting changed everything between them forever. After the awards show, Whitney made an unusual move for her. She approached Bobby directly, something she rarely did with men she found attractive. I bet he's a good friend, she told herself, thinking she could keep things simple and platonic. They exchanged numbers, and within weeks they were talking on the phone every night for hours. Bobby was different from anyone Whitney had ever met in the entertainment industry. Where her previous relationships had been carefully managed by her team and family, Bobby was spontaneous and unpredictable. He made her laugh in ways that surprised her and challenged her to step outside the perfectly constructed image that had made her famous but had also become her golden cage. Bobby and I basically come from the same place, Whitney would later tell Rolling Stone magazine. Bobby comes from Boston, out of the projects. I come from Newark, out of the projects. Bobby has 2 very strong parents. I have 2 very strong parents. On the surface, it seemed like they understood each other in ways that others in their privileged celebrity world couldn't. But there were warning signs Whitney chose to ignore. Bobby's jealousy surfaced when Whitney mentioned other men. He would become quiet, withdrawn, or accusatory. "Who is he to you?" became a phrase Whitney heard regularly. Whitney's family was concerned from the beginning. Sissy Houston saw through Bobby's charm immediately. "That boy is trouble," she warned Whitney. But Whitney was 26 and tired of being treated like a child. Then came the moment that broke Whitney's heart forever and revealed Bobby's possessiveness. In 1990, Whitney was offered a major Hollywood film role. When she told Bobby, his reaction was explosive. "You don't need to be in no movie," he said. "You got me now. Why you trying to be around all those Hollywood guys?" He made her choose, the movie or their relationship. Whitney, deeply in love and believing compromise was healthy, turned down the role. She would regret this decision forever, but thought she was choosing love over ambition. Bobby's control over Whitney's career decisions only grew stronger as their relationship progressed. He began inserting himself into her professional meetings, often contradicting her wishes or speaking for her as if she couldn't advocate for herself. Whitney's longtime friends and collaborators started to notice troubling changes in her behavior. She seemed less confident, more anxious, constantly checking Bobby's reactions before making any decisions about her own career. But Bobby was also capable of incredible sweetness and romantic gestures when it served his purposes. He would surprise Whitney with expensive gifts, write her love letters filled with promises of devotion, and tell her she was the most beautiful woman in the world. These moments of tenderness made Whitney believe that their problems were just normal relationship growing pains that every couple experienced. In December 1991, Bobby proposed to Whitney during what appeared to be a romantic dinner at her sprawling New Jersey mansion. Whitney said yes immediately, convinced that marriage would solve their problems and deepen their connection. The engagement made headlines worldwide. America's sweetheart was getting married to the bad boy of R&B, a pairing that fascinated the media and the public. What happened next in their wedding planning revealed Bobby's true character and shocked Whitney's inner circle. The wedding was set for July 18, 1992, at Whitney's estate in Mendham, New Jersey. Whitney wanted an elegant, intimate ceremony that reflected her gospel roots and family values. But Bobby had vastly different ideas. He wanted a massive celebration that would announce to the world that he had won the ultimate prize, Whitney Houston herself. As wedding plans progressed over the following months, Bobby's behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. He would disappear for days without explanation, leaving Whitney to handle all the arrangements alone while fielding questions from vendors and family members about where he was. When confronted about his absences, he would accuse her of being controlling or trying to change him into someone he wasn't. 3 weeks before the wedding, Whitney discovered something that should have made her call off the entire ceremony. She found evidence that Bobby was still seeing other women while engaged to her. When she confronted him with the proof, Bobby didn't deny it. Instead, he masterfully turned the situation around, asking Whitney why she was snooping through his things and accusing her of not trusting him. "If you don't trust me, then maybe we shouldn't get married," Bobby said with calculated coldness, knowing that Whitney was too invested in their public engagement to back out now. He had correctly calculated that Whitney's pride and public image were more important to her than her private pain and humiliation. Whitney's closest friends, including Robin Crawford, begged her to reconsider the marriage. But Whitney felt trapped between her public image and her private doubts about Bobby's character and commitment. On July 18, 1992, 800 guests gathered at Whitney's estate for what was supposed to be the wedding of the decade. Whitney looked absolutely stunning in her $40,000 custom Christian Dior gown, and Bobby was undeniably handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. But those closest to Whitney could see the uncertainty and sadness in her eyes as she walked down the aisle toward a future that would ultimately destroy her. The ceremony itself was beautiful, filled with traditional gospel music and heartfelt vows that brought tears to many guests' eyes. Whitney sang "I Will Always Love You" during the reception, her voice soaring with what seemed like genuine happiness and love. But even in that moment of apparent joy and celebration, there were subtle signs of trouble that only her closest friends could detect. The night Whitney called the police, she made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. The early years of Whitney and Bobby's marriage were marked by her incredible professional success and escalating personal turmoil behind closed doors. Whitney's career reached unprecedented heights with the Bodyguard soundtrack, which became one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time and made her a global icon. But instead of celebrating his wife's extraordinary success, Bobby became increasingly resentful and threatened by her achievements. "I think somewhere inside something happens to a man when a woman has that much control," Whitney would later tell Oprah Winfrey in her Watershed interview. Bobby's masculinity felt threatened by Whitney's dominance, not just in their relationship, but in the entertainment industry itself. He was used to being the star, the center of attention, but married to Whitney Houston, he became known primarily as Whitney Houston's husband. Bobby began acting out in public settings, often embarrassing Whitney at important industry events and award shows. He would drink too much, start arguments with other guests, or make inappropriate comments to the press that reflected poorly on Whitney's carefully maintained image. Whitney found herself constantly apologizing for her husband's behavior and making elaborate excuses for his increasingly erratic actions. In March 1993, their daughter Bobby Christina was born, and for a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed like parenthood might stabilize their turbulent marriage. Whitney was a devoted and loving mother, and Bobby appeared to mature somewhat with the responsibility of fatherhood weighing on him. But the underlying issues in their relationship, the jealousy, control, and psychological manipulation, remained completely unresolved. As Whitney's career continued to flourish throughout the mid-1990s, Bobby's solo career began to stagnate and decline. His albums weren't selling as well as they had in the late 1980s, and he wasn't getting the same level of media attention and adoration he had once enjoyed. His resentment toward Whitney grew exponentially, and he began to undermine her success in both subtle and obvious ways that hurt her professionally and personally. Bobby started making unreasonable demands about Whitney's career that seemed specifically designed to limit her success rather than support her dreams. He insisted that she turn down certain high-profile projects because they would require too much travel time away from him. He complained bitterly when she had to work late in the recording studio. He made her feel guilty for any professional success that didn't directly benefit him or include him in some meaningful way. But Bobby's reaction to her success revealed his darkest side and the true nature of their toxic relationship. By the mid-1990s, Whitney's behavior began to change in ways that deeply concerned her family and longtime friends. She became more withdrawn and isolated, less likely to speak up confidently in business meetings, and seemed to constantly seek Bobby's approval before making any decisions about her own life and career. The confident, radiant woman who had conquered the music world was slowly but surely disappearing before everyone's eyes. Rumors began circulating in the entertainment press about serious problems in their marriage, but Whitney maintained a determined public facade of happiness and marital bliss. In interviews, she defended Bobby fiercely and insisted that their love was stronger than ever, that they were just a normal couple dealing with the pressures of fame. But privately, she was struggling desperately with the reality of her increasingly dangerous situation. Bobby's controlling behavior extended to virtually every aspect of Whitney's daily life. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her extensively about her whereabouts, and became irrationally suspicious of any friendship she tried to maintain. He was particularly threatened by Whitney's close relationship with Robin Crawford, whom he viewed as direct competition for Whitney's loyalty, attention, and love. The isolation that Bobby systematically created around Whitney was both psychological and physical in nature. He convinced her that her family and friends were jealous of their relationship and were actively trying to break them up out of spite and envy. He told her repeatedly that she couldn't trust anyone except him, that he was the only one who truly understood and loved her for who she really was beneath the fame and success. This sophisticated psychological manipulation was particularly effective because Whitney had always been a natural people pleaser who valued harmony and peace over confrontation and conflict. She had been raised in a traditional household to be respectful and accommodating to the men in her life, qualities that unfortunately made her extremely vulnerable to Bobby's calculated psychological manipulation and control tactics. By the early 2000s, Whitney's career was declining. The woman known for flawless performances was making headlines for erratic behavior. Substance abuse was a symptom of deeper problems, not the cause. When Whitney finally found the courage to leave, Bobby said something unforgivable. The breaking point came in 2005 during Being Bobby Brown filming. The show was supposed to rehabilitate Bobby's image, but exposed their marriage's dysfunction instead. Cameras captured Bobby treating Whitney with casual cruelty, dismissing her opinions and belittling her. America saw the truth. The woman once worshipped as a goddess was being treated like a servant in her own home. The reality show became Whitney's turning point. Seeing herself through America's eyes finally gave her the perspective to understand what her marriage had become. In 2006, Whitney filed for separation. Bobby alternated between begging and threatening. "You'll never make it without me," Bobby told her. "Nobody's going to want you when I tell them what you're really like." But for the first time, Whitney didn't believe him. What Whitney confessed to Oprah left the world speechless. The divorce was finalized in 2007, and Whitney won full custody of Bobby Christina. For the first time in 15 years, she was free to make decisions without fear. In 2009, Whitney sat down with Oprah for a tell-all interview that revealed the truth about her marriage. Millions who had grown up loving Whitney Houston watched in shock. "He spit on me," Whitney told Oprah, her voice steady but filled with pain. "He actually spit on me. And my daughter was coming down the stairs and she saw that." The revelation shocked the world. Whitney described the psychological torture, constant criticism, isolation from family and friends, how Bobby had convinced her she was worthless without him. She talked about how he had undermined her confidence and made her doubt her own perceptions. I took the phone and I hit him over the head with it, Whitney continued, describing her rare moments of fighting back. The most heartbreaking part was when Whitney talked about staying for Bobby Christina's sake. She had convinced herself that a broken home was worse than an abusive one, not understanding that her daughter was being traumatized by witnessing the dysfunction. When Oprah asked why she finally found courage to leave, her answer was simple. I just knew. I was like, you don't smell right, you don't look right, something is going on. She had discovered evidence of Bobby's continued infidelity and realized she deserved better. Whitney's confession was more than an interview. It was a public declaration of independence. She was reclaiming her narrative and refusing to let Bobby's version define her legacy. In the years following divorce, Whitney worked to rebuild her life and career. She struggled with long-term effects of psychological abuse, but showed remarkable resilience. She focused on her relationship with Bobby Christina and tried to provide stability. Whitney's story with Bobby Brown was ultimately a cautionary tale about toxic love. She had confused intensity with passion, control with care, and possession with protection. But her courage in leaving and speaking out helped other women recognize abuse signs. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, the world mourned not just an incredible talent, but the tragedy of a woman who had fought so hard to reclaim her life, only to have it cut short. Her marriage to Bobby Brown would always be part of her story, but not the end of it. Whitney Houston had found her voice again, not just as a singer, but as a survivor. The night she walked away from Bobby Brown, Whitney finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. It was supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. It was supposed to celebrate your light, not dim it. And most importantly, it was supposed to set you free, not hold you captive. That understanding came too late to save her marriage, but just in time to save her soul.